So we continue.
A user on Quora actually wrote a really interesting piece on what's called shrinkflation that I had to include here because these pictures are absolutely mind-blowing. As you can see here, now you get slightly less than before. The new peanut butter container needs less of it to be filled. You're secretly getting 4 fewer cookies. The bag is half empty, or is it half full? Normal-sized container, fewer markers. Same gel, less of it. In a way, this is a new common practice throughout so many industries to give you the illusion that prices are staying the same, even though technically you're paying more for less. Crazy.
Okay, so many problems with that. One, shrinkflation is something that people have been talking about for 30 years. So there can be a one-time shrinkage of a certain product going from 16 ounces to 14 ounces, but that can't be happening again and again, because if that were the case, then a 16-ounce product would be down to 1 ounce by now. Number two, this affects people who eat exclusively processed food. And so going on this tangent a little bit, if you buy actual normal healthy food, fruits and vegetables and things that are sold per pound, then you are not going to be subject to the shrinkflation. Now, if you eat processed food, which is already marked up about 4x relative to the price of its ingredients, yeah, you're already eating something so unhealthy that then you have bigger problem than worrying about esoteric economic concepts. The Economics Explained video used ramen, and Stephan is using potato chips and cookies. I mean, come on, this is terrible. Shame on anyone for eating that much processed food versus normal food, in which case you will not be subject to shrinkflation. Also, when you buy gasoline at the gas station, they're still selling it in gallons. They're not creating a new unit that is 0.9 gallons or 0.8 gallons. The items that actually matter are priced in universal units, such as barrels of oil, gallons of gasoline, ounces of gold, things like that. So to cherry pick a few elements of processed food, which may have had a one-time experience of shrinking the package size for the purpose of deception, which has been talked about for 30 years, and it only affects a portion of one sector, and to say that is representative of hyperinflation across the entire economy is truly ridiculous. Using an anecdote like this is not data, and using a narrative that has been used for 30 years is extremely, extremely weak. So anyway, we continue.
Right? Now here's the thing, in small doses, inflation is actually encouraged, and when it's under control, it could actually be a good thing. The United States has really done its best to create a safe, stable, and consistent inflation rate of about 2% annually. And over the last 25 years, they've pretty much hit exactly that. For some people, that could be great. That means that certain assets will rise in value, like stocks, commodities, and real estate. So if inflation goes up 3% a year, then chances are so do your investments. Other people say that moderate inflation is necessary to keep our economy moving forward. Because if we know our money is going to be losing a little bit of value every year, it encourages us to either spend or reinvest back into our economy, which keeps it growing. It's just seen as a healthy indicator that our economy knows exactly what to expect, businesses can plan accordingly, and it's slow enough that most of us won't even notice it day to day. The problem, however, is when inflation begins to eat away at the purchasing power of your money faster than you're able to make it. Well, if we look back historically, we can see that since the early 1900s, we've had a few periods of excessively high inflation and several times where it's exceeded 10% annually. So what caused that, and could we see something similar to that again today?
So we can pause there. Now, at least to his credit, he recognizes that 2% inflation has been the long-term norm up till now, including the last 12 months. So despite the fact that he said on a year-over-year basis, one cherry-picked snapshot of inflation was the highest in 30 years, the average for the last long-term past period has been about 2% a year, and that's normal. He correctly points out the importance of inflation to stimulate velocity of money as well, and how deflation would be bad. Now, I have a much more detailed video about how inflation is not always bad and deflation is very bad in this video over here, and anyone who's truly interested in the subject of inflation, deflation has to see that video, because a lot of people are too simplistic in their thinking. They actually think that inflation is always bad because the price that they pay for things goes up, whereas deflation must be good because the price of what they pay for things goes down. No recognition about their salary also going up or going down, because somehow their salary is just something that falls from the sky. It's not a decision that their employer has decided to pay them for and holds them accountable to the fact that are they generating enough value for the salary and benefits that an employee is being paid. A lot of people can't think in such nuanced and sophisticated terms, and that includes a lot of PhD economists who, despite being people you would think would know better, are still of a belief that all inflation is automatically bad because that means you pay more for stuff. and all deflation is good because that means you pay less for things. A lot of these people are tenured faculty at academic institutions, therefore they don't really understand market forces at all. Now, Stephan is a real estate guy, and all the money that is ever made through real estate is heavily dependent on inflation, and there's almost no sector that gets destroyed more in a scenario of deflation, because real estate is highly leveraged and debt is extremely painful for anyone in a deflationary environment because your payments are fixed but your salary is going down. Whereas in an inflationary environment, you can make a lot of money if you own real estate. So at least he said some inflation is good. He didn't go far enough, though. He shouldn't be talking about high inflation at all as a real estate guy, but at least to his credit, he doesn't say that all inflation is bad and all deflation is good, if nothing else. That puts him ahead of a fair number of people. So we continue.
But what about today? Because certainly we are in unprecedented times if inflation is rising at the fastest level in decades, right? Well, I'll be honest, that's the million-dollar question, and it just depends on who you believe. Personally, I've said this year that inflation is going to be much worse and last much longer than we expect, and so far that's happened. But that's also a rather open-ended assumption that means absolutely nothing without a definitive time frame. And if I were to give it a random guess, I would say another 18 to 24 months before things begin to normalize. But please don't listen to me, because I'm not an economist, and I just do a lot of reading online because that's what I find interesting. That's it. Although in terms of what you could do about this, if you're investing, you should really be sticking with good, solid, long-term companies that you could hold for decades, and then...
Okay, so this is not bad advice. At least he said that the inflation may only last for what he considers to be 18 to 24 months. I think it'll be a lot less than that, and in fact they'll be printing more money than they are printing now in that time frame. But at least he isn't saying that it's going to be forever and ever high and high like some people say. Also, at least he's giving practical advice about what you want to do if you believe there's high inflation. Now, let's see what his advice is.
Don't sell. You could also look to refinance your mortgage or lock in a low interest rate now before eventually they might end up increasing. This is exactly why I've chosen to keep my mortgages for as long as possible at the lowest possible interest rate that I could find. If we do see worse and longer lasting inflation than we expected, it just means that it's going to be easier to pay off with future dollars. And when my interest rates are 2.8% fixed for the next 30 years, if inflation averages anything higher than that, it essentially means I'm getting paid to borrow money, which is an absolutely amazing concept. I'm also choosing to diversify about 8% of my portfolio into a 50-50 split between Bitcoin and Ethereum, just as a hedge against whatever might happen. Plus, I'm a fan of cryptocurrency in general, so I'm happy to allocate a small portion of my portfolio into something that I'm still trying my best to understand.
Okay, this advice is pretty good advice if you think there's going to be high inflation. Again, I don't think there is going to be high inflation to the extent you should build an investment thesis around it. But at least he said, pick the companies you like and stay in them long term. Now, I say just pick an index. Don't be in the business of picking stocks at all. But in principle, he's saying a similar thing. Lock in a low rate for sure. Now, I don't think the Fed funds rate is going to rise significantly at all. Any small rise that the Federal Reserve does will quickly be reversed when the market crashes. We are at a 0% Fed funds rate forever, and this is causing a housing bubble for sure, as I also talk about in other videos on this channel, such as this video over here. He does also say that gold is not the right thing if you believe that there is going to be inflation. Now, I'm not a fan of Bitcoin or Ethereum, and I don't think average people should get involved in cryptocurrencies, but at least those have been going up. Gold fundamentally is not a hedge, even if you think there's going to be inflation. So any thesis built on gold is wrong on two levels. One, if you think there's inflation, you're going to be wrong. But number two, that's not even the right thing to be in if you think there's going to be inflation. And I talk about that in this video over here. People who invest in gold actually never talk about the returns, because the returns of gold have been terrible for the longest time. And there's other videos on this channel where I talk about how Mark Cuban even makes fun of people who think gold is an investment thesis, and I agree with him. But Stephan's advice is pretty boilerplate and not bad if you think there's going to be high inflation. Now, if you watch this channel, you know there's not going to be high inflation, and by April, May, or June, that's my time frame of talking about it. People are going to stop screaming about inflation, except for those who already say that we have always been in hyperinflation. A few kooks like that. But otherwise, all the screeching about inflation that we see right now is generally going to subside by that time frame for reasons I have discussed elsewhere. Okay, that was the extent of his video. Now, Part of the reason that he is wrong about this is because as a real estate guy, he has made millions of dollars in real estate, but he should recognize that a very large factor of that was, in fact, this baseline 2 to 3% inflation. And the vast majority of money made in real estate is because of the ambient inflation of the economy. Remember, a piece of real estate is an inert commodity. It does not spontaneously renovate itself or spontaneously rise in value. It is not a knowledge-based product like the shares of a tech company or something like that. It requires constant maintenance and other things associated with just the sustenance of that real estate. So it is a commodity. It rises because of two things: scarcity of supply in relation to how desirable the location is, as well as the ambient inflation of the economy. Anyone who owned real estate in 1970 was suddenly very rich by 1982 because that 12-year period had a lot of inflation. And now, because of the 2% ambient inflation, it takes a lot longer for people's home equity to truly accumulate in most parts of the country. The only places in America where home equity has accumulated much faster than inflation are places with very artificial supply restrictions, and that's called the zoning tax, which I talk about in this video over here. And that is not resonant with the first principles of how value is created in the economy. Something like Zoom gets around the zoning tax because now people can telework and they don't have to live in Palo Alto or Mountain View or Manhattan anymore. They can live 100 miles away or even 500 miles away in a low tax state and still be doing their jobs, and that is already happening, as I speak about in this channel. So someone who makes money from real estate should not be worried about, oh, inflation a little bit high, because this propels the wealth gains of real estate in the first place. And conversely, deflation devastates the real estate sector far more than almost any other sector because the real estate sector is heavily leveraged with debt. Buying a house is really just a leverage bet on the local inflation in that vicinity, and leverage can work in both directions as well. So all in all, he's not the biggest screamer about inflation. He doesn't say that we are already in hyperinflation, even though the title of his video is deceptive and misleading in that regard. He's not as bad as Economics Explained, which I demolish in this tile up here if you haven't seen that already. But still, he's wrong about how bad inflation is, and he is somewhat wrong about what is going to happen in the future. The other thing he's wrong about is he talks about the Federal Reserve QE as a contributor to inflation, but there was no recognition of how other countries in the world are also printing money, and the US Federal Reserve does only 25% of the world's total quantitative easing. I speak about that each month in my monthly series of the World QE Update, and the most recent one you can see in this card up here. But he also falls into that trap that the Federal Reserve is printing money and therefore there must be inflation in the United States. No recognition that there are other countries, and no recognition of how quantitative easing has been going on for 12 years now. So why should this supposed inflation be happening now? It's been going on for 12 years. That's another dimension that Stephan does not appear to be aware of, and he has not addressed in this video or any other video. So anyway, that was my assessment of his video about hyperinflation that he posted a few days ago. A lot of boilerplate stuff. He's listening to the same economists who have predicted 100 of the last 0 bouts of hyperinflation, and this will be the same type of situation. But anyway, if you're watching this channel, you are into much more sophisticated concepts of finance and economics for sure. And if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much for watching.